The fires in 2019, they caused a massive popular protest movement against Morales. You were a big part of that. And now you said you were targeted a lot by trolls during the midst of this, and that sort of the social media system Bolivia had was largely built by China. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it was, I'm very happy in a very weird way that there was so much work to do in the forest fires, actually on the ground, because I was there, that I didn't have enough time to worry about this. But I had over, I think, 1,000 threats coming into my Twitter accounts and my Facebook account and my phone. This happened the day after I gave an interview to the BBC explaining the fires and how we needed the government to declare national emergency. And the level of threats of different images and different fake accounts, I could tell a lot of them were actually just trolls, was very, I think, could have been very disheartening had I had the time to focus on this. But when literally your home is on fire, when you look around and everything is on fire and your friends are passing out because they don't have enough protection equipment, tweets and trolls are really unimportant. And I think that's also one of the things that I've noticed, that they do this because they want to distract you from the real work.
Good point.
Yeah, and now every time that there are targeted attacks on my accounts, which still happens, I just know, this is kind of yes, I'm doing something effective, and therefore I have to focus a lot more on the cause and on the issues than on defending myself, because as an activist, I'm not going to ask people to vote for me anytime. I don't need people to like me or think I'm the best person in the world. My job as an activist is to be a speaker for the causes that are really important. So that's where my focus should always be. And that was a great lesson during the forest fires. It was very easy to tell what was important and what wasn't. So thank you to all the trolls. They taught me that very quickly.
That's a lesson a lot of people on the internet need to learn. Focus on what's important.
Yeah.
Speaking of, did you see the new He-Man? My gosh.
Okay.
How do you feel about, I know that you do a lot more work than I do following the Chinese influence in different countries. Do you think there was some sort of thing happening around this with the new election in Bolivia? Was this something that was even on your radar?
Do you mean the use of like trolls?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's like you're saying, like, authoritarian regimes learn tactics from other authoritarian regimes, and the best authoritarian regime has socialism with Chinese characteristics. So if Bolivia is having an internet system that's being kind of designed by China, I'm sure a lot of the tactics the government would be using would also be tactics the Chinese Communist Party has like recommended and probably taught people. We do see this in Africa, for instance, where Huawei will build the internet infrastructure of some place and will specifically have Huawei agents teaching people how to perform censorship, how to target opposition leaders. So while there, I haven't seen like any like hard evidence, it's a pattern that it's pretty common wherever the Chinese internet goes.
Was it Chile, where there was somewhere in Latin America where they were essentially importing Chinese security, like not just kind of security cameras and that stuff, but also just the kind of mechanisms for control and surveillance?
Well, I mean, China's interest in Latin America is pretty huge. Like recently I saw an article about how Cuban security forces in the latest rounds of protests have been getting training from Chinese security forces.
Well, that's definitely not a surprise.
That's definitely it's the same thing in Venezuela as well. So obviously the Chinese Communist Party has interests in Latin America, and they're going to protect those interests and the governments that back them.
Like Bolivians' movement towards socialism with Chinese characteristics party?
Well, Jhanisse, you were talking about some of the extractive policies earlier that the Bolivian government is putting into place about the natural resources. Are a lot of those going to China?
So essentially all of the let's talk about the dam specifically. So many times when the government is enacting new supreme decrees or laws that allow the construction of these things, because they need to do this as well when they're going to use land that is indigenous territory or a national park, right? And not a protected area. Usually what happens, and for example, I have it right here for you, in the case of the Rositas project, the one I was telling you about that would be moving more than 500 indigenous families. This will be built with 80% financing from the Export-Import Bank. So we know where that's coming from. And as many other loans from the Chinese government, when this money comes in, and this is what makes the life of civil society so difficult, the Chinese government, the contract with Bolivia is essentially, as in many other countries, we give you the financing, but you have to hire Chinese companies to come and do this work. And it's not only hiring the Chinese company to come and do the work in our territory, but they bring their own workers, they bring their own equipment, they bring their own system. Overall, they don't even hire local people and let's say that then they generate jobs. That's not what happens. And since it works in such a hermetic way, there's really no reports that we can use to check what they're doing. So, and the most interesting part, and this is an investigation done by Fundación Solón in Bolivia, the Solón Foundation, they do a lot of environmental investigations, is that, for example, with the Rositas Dam, and I suspect that this is probably happening with many other Chinese projects in Bolivia, there won't really be a gain economically for the state generating power from this specific infrastructure, because the cost, given the characteristics of the place, the location, and the people needed to be hired, the cost of producing this energy is going to be too high for the market. So in the end, they're probably, if they do it, they're going to need to have some sort of I don't know how to say this in English, like the government will have to be paying for some of this before they can actually sell it to someone else. And instead of it being an economic gain, it's going to be an economic loss for the country. So in the end, if you look at the overall project, the only people that are winning money out of this and the only real beneficiaries from this are the Chinese companies that are enacting the projects. It's not like this infrastructure is actually going to be beneficial on the long run for Bolivia or for our economy, not even for Bolivians, not even for the state itself.
Win-win mutual cooperation. Well, so why is the government interested in this? Like, I could understand if like they were somehow getting some kind of kickback to it, but like as from what you're saying, they're going to have to subsidize the power coming from these dams. So they lose as well, as much as the Bolivian people.
Exactly. But then, when there's such high levels of corruption, and corruption between Chinese companies and government officials is something that we have already seen with the Zapata case. I don't know if you remember that one. We can talk about it. But again, when there's such high levels of corruption, when you have a state whose rule of law is not really existent, when sometimes, if by some miracle, someone points out to a corruption case inside the government, you know that the judiciary is not really going to do anything about it, then everyone can get away with anything. So the state is losing, the people are losing, but probably the people that signed these things are gaining a lot of money out of this for their own personal banks. And the Chinese companies and the Chinese government, they're getting so much. So essentially, if you look at it right now, the Bolivian government is loaning my generation's future, indigenous people's futures, because in the long, there may be some gain for Chinese companies, but the loss is for all of Bolivia. We're already one of the countries most affected by the climate change and climate emergencies. And with even further destruction of our natural areas, this is going to make things even worse. And on top of that, we will have a debt with China that we will have to repay for many, many years.
It's really like the worst form of colonialization, really.